Hey there, Simon here. Dev and I are still taking a bit of a breather while we tend to a few things. Fear not, though, I'm heading back to Vancouver this coming week as you are listening to this, so we can dive into the action of the World Tour Finals, and of course, the greatest Masters series of all time, Paris-Bercy. To tide us over until next week, we wanted to replay an old episode, which chronicles the life of Juan Martin del Potro. Delpo himself has been in the news recently and is turning into a politician of sorts. Before that, though, he was a hell of a tennis player, and Dev and I couldn't wait to talk about the life of this gentle giant. Please enjoy.
Simon, we returned to the 2016 Rio Olympics where gold was on the line. You had a number of guys hoping to win something that they haven't in their illustrious careers. Number one being Novak Djokovic, the number one at the time, really the cream of the crop on the tour in terms of what the other guys were dealing with injuries, etc.
I think we look back at it and we forget there's been multiple eras of Novak. There's been multiple times that he has been the summer of Novak and the truly best player in the world. 2016 is the heyday. At this point in time, he's just won the Australian Open. He's won the French Open after Rafael Nadal, who we'll come on to shortly, pulled out of Paris. I know it's the third time in Rafael Nadal's career that he's not won the French Open that he's been entered into. He had a very bad wrist injury, which kept him out of the game for a little while. But Djokovic secured the French Open. He secured the Australian Open. And honestly, he was the best player in the world at that moment, closely followed behind him by Andy Murray, who won at Wimbledon, which the famous shot of him winning Wimbledon, and of course, also the famous shot of Roger Federer dying in the semi-final against Canada's favorite son, Milos Raonic.
A truly devastating couple of weeks if you look at it from the perspective of your Fidel fan, where Rafa's injury problems return and Roger looks worse perhaps than we've ever seen him in that semifinal against Milos. I think the postmortems mostly it revolved around the fact that Fed was done, and he was not coming back to win a major at all, and it'd be a miracle if he ever returned actually to his prior heights. And we know, of course, that he proved the doubters wrong. But this week we focus on a guy that I think the alternate timeline for him is one of the most interesting ones you can think of when we talk about tennis and how careers would have gone if those devilish things that we call injuries did not plague the player. And Juan Martin del Potro might be exhibit A of someone who was robbed of far greater things in what has already been a wonderful career. But we entered the Rio Olympics in 2016 with Juan Martin del Potro, again, battling through injuries. It had been 2.5 years really of injury problems. And 2016, there were up and downs, but nothing really was expected of him entering the Olympics.
Yeah, and he's entering this tournament with a protected ranking, of course, which he had to rely on for a little bit during that period of time, just simply because he'd missed so many Grand Slam tournaments. I believe he played Wimbledon. I believe he beat Stanislav Wawrinka, and it was one of his first tournaments back to actually playing at a level that we considered like the level that he could get to. So no one expected anything. I think that's probably the right way of looking at it, especially when the tennis gods smile down on the draw, if you're a Djokovic or Del Potro fan, and line them up against each other in round one. I think we were robbed of this at a latter stage of this tournament, but to get it in round one. And the Olympics does throw up surprises. It always does. There is examples throughout the history of the tournament where players have won it, or players have been knocked out that you wouldn't expect to be knocked out. And this round one matchup between Del Potro and Djokovic was exquisite.
2 tie breaks, not much separating these two players. I think when the draw shook out the way it did, people were salivating because it didn't matter where Juan Martin was at really physically. I think what we knew of this man, the Tower of Tandil, one of the greatest nicknames, I think, in tennis history and perhaps sports, no matter where he was at, he was going to give Novak something. And of course, what he gave him was a stunning defeat in the first round to remove the tournament favorite and really open this up. I mean, we talked about Roger not being there, but Novak really was the player to beat Bush coming into this. I don't think we can say that lightly enough, that this was a massive upset.
Yeah, and as we touched on before, Rafael Nadal had that wrist injury, and not really a whole lot was expected of him either. So the fact that you had the top seed being dumped out unceremoniously in the first round by an upstart player. And I think the other thing is that even though Del Potro won that match, not much was expected of him. I think just the emotion and the outpouring that occurred at the conclusion of that match. It's not often that you see two players leaving the court literally in tears, both of them just completely broken as human beings. And this is a round one matchup. It's pretty astonishing looking back. The highlights are amazing. The end of the match is even more incredible, just looking at the outpouring of emotion from both players at the net and then as they're leaving the court. Djokovic has talked at length about this being the worst loss of his career, which seems amazing to think about it, considering a player of that standing who has been through so much. But I can understand. It's the Olympic Games. It's everything you've trained for. And he desperately wanted a gold medal. And to be dumped out in round one against a very good friend of his must have been so difficult.
Juan Martin was doing an Instagram live chat during this worldwide quarantine with Spurs legend, basketball legend Manu Ginobili. And it's interesting, he talked about the Rio Olympics and how it was a defining moment in his career. He said, quote, "I had a before and after in the Rio Olympics," mentioning that there's a clear delineation in his career before Rio 2016 and after Rio 2016. And he cited that victory over Novak as the biggest moment of his career, or one of the biggest moments. And that's quite saying something for someone who is a major champion. He says, quote, "I had a before and after in the Olympic Games in Rio. The match with Djokovic changed my situation for the better. I was able to take off my career again and rearrange myself as I could." I think the issue for Juan Martin throughout these injuries, Bush, was the fact that he didn't really adjust to how he had to play with all those things that were nagging him.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. He came back multiple times, and you saw just seeing him on court how the backhand changed specifically. More slice, more use of one hand coming off the racket, less power on that side. And as we get into, I think at some point this matchup, you will see there is a very clear tactic from other players that he's being played against at this Olympics, which is to put everything, literally everything, into the backhand side, because the forehand, we all know it's one of the best shots in all of tennis. And you could argue it's one of the best shots historically of any player of any generation. Just no one hits the ball that hard with that level of consistency and that many winners with that frame size. It's pretty astonishing watching what he's able to do from that wing. But yeah, it caused massive problems. The wrist injury completely changed his game and made him become a little bit more tactical, I would say, on the backhand side. It forced him to figure out ways of how he could move around and use his forehand more.
He beat Souza after Djokovic in the second round, took out Tower of Tandil in the third round, Batista Agut in the quarterfinals.
Our boy, Batista Agut.
RBA
friend of the pod.
Doing the thing on a hard court like we know him to do, to set up a meeting and the match we're going to cover today with Rafael Nadal in the semifinals. You knew Rafa was going to make it deep in the Olympics. Wrist injury be damned. He's the ultimate warrior, but when he puts on any sort of Spanish color or a Spanish flag or is representing his country, you know he's going to give everything and then some. It was a pretty straightforward run to the semifinals. So Rafa, Delbonis, Seppi, Gilles Simon, Thomas Bellucci in three sets, which was a bit tougher than you would have expected. But it set up a match in which I think you could argue, Bush, aesthetically, it's a very pleasing matchup. And maybe one of the top five of these guys, I think, when you want to talk about just enjoying watching a match, these guys, when they get together on a court, it's pretty fun.
It really is very fun to watch both of them play. And the thing that's really noticeable in this match is just how scared, in a lot of ways, Rafael Nadal is the forehand of Juan Martin del Potro. Just, it's very funny watching arguably the greatest player of all time, and Rafael Nadal being forced further and further behind the baseline, just being walloped by forehands coming down at him. There's points where he plays far behind the baseline anyway, but he's just outright being pummeled back to the line judges. It's very amusing to watch.
Del Potro's forehand sounds like a gun going off sometimes with the level of force, or like something being clubbed. Like I hate the image, but like an animal being clubbed. That's the sound it feels like when Juan Martin is unloading that forehand. It's incredible. And we're rewatching this not on HD, like excellent quality on the playback. I'm watching like a YouTube stream and it sounds ridiculous even with that quality.
It really does, yeah. And I think we touched on Del Potro, but just a little bit more color on where Nadal is at in this one as well. Going into this Olympic Games, he was entered into the doubles and he thought he was just going to make a run in the doubles and that was it. His entry into the singles is actually quite late. It's the one that tends to be forgotten about 2016. And of course, this is Rafael Nadal. So if he's entered in a tournament, he's going to play to try and win it. But I think it was just a few days prior to the Olympic Games that he actually made a decision that he was going to go ahead and play in the singles. So pretty astonishing to make it as far as he did. And of course, he makes it to the semifinal. And this is where we find ourselves. And an all-time classic ensues from there.
The match begins and Del Potro looks pretty damn good. He gets the break early. Anytime you watch Juan Martin when he's feeling good about himself and when he's playing well, I'm always mesmerized and amazed by how well a man that big can move, Bush, because it is just a marvel.
It is, yeah. And I mentioned that he changed his game considering that he tried to step round to the forehand more. And that is just a sign of someone who is an excellent mover, to be able to make that adjustment, to be able to try and get around, try and get around that frame, which is so difficult sometimes. You've seen a litany of players who are above 6'5" really struggle to be able to move, but he actually looks very natural, which is astonishing, really, when someone is of that height and that power. It's kind of freakish in a lot of ways to be able to move as well as he does on the tennis court. And you don't get to the positions he is without being a good mover on the tennis court. You just have to be. He's not a serve bot, although I think he possesses one of the most aesthetically pleasing serves you'll ever see. Nothing wrong with that one. It's pretty much throw it up and hit it. It looks beautiful. It's a wondrous sight.
I think one of the more alarming facts when you think about Rafael Nadal is the fact that I don't think he was ever considered destined for greatness on hard courts. It was a bit of an afterthought, Bush. I think that's fair to say, right? Like his prowess on hard courts, it's good, don't get me wrong. I mean, you have a Australian Open in 2009, you have a US Open in 2010 and 2013, but you're not expecting Rafa to blitz people in a classic hardcore match, maybe at this point in 2016. I think this is something that came along later on in his career.
No, I think that's true. I think for the most part, we tend to forget how good of a hardcourt player he actually is. And I think all three of the big three, we tend to underestimate how good they are on their worst surfaces, which is pretty crazy, really, considering all the titles they've won and that they're oftentimes favorites going into those tournaments, that they work incredibly hard and they recognize where their strengths line up with the surface they're on and how they can hide their weaknesses. And I think you have seen Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, for that matter, trying to be a bit more aggressive on hard courts as they've got later into their careers, using a slightly heavier modified racket, just trying to up the swing rate slightly. And I think at this point, you wouldn't say that he's not the favorite going into this match, but you could argue that he wasn't considered an overwhelming favorite.
No, I would agree with you in saying that Nadal is the favorite, but it's a very slim margin, especially considering the body of work that JMDP is putting up and using that Djokovic win as a springboard. But even though he has that and he has an excellent start, you see Nadal grind his way back into the match. And I don't think I've ever seen him employ the backhand slice as much as he did in this match alone. But he used it to his advantage in the first set. He gets to 5-5. He holds there. It was a massive game, I think, in this early on, in which there's openings for Juan Martin. And we like to say this about Rafa a lot, but you better take those openings because they're so slim and open by just a small margin. And he wasn't able to do that at 5-5. And of course, Rafa jumps on him to take the first set 7-5, breaking him right after that.
The sun is playing a massive factor in this first set. It's blinding watching the two of them. And we've got that horrible shadow coming right across the court, which makes it impossible, where you're serving from the juice side and it's fine. You're in the shade, and then you're serving from the ad side and you're being utterly blinded as you're trying to serve. It's not an easy thing to deal with.
So I was in Houston watching this match. I was on the road with Toronto FC, but I remember watching this at a hotel room the day before Toronto FC was slated to play in Houston. But the bar was packed watching this match, and the sunlight was devastating then. And on the rewatch, also devastating.
Yeah, Nadal's very, very wide on the ad side serve. It's very, very strange to watch. You don't often see a singles player line up that wide, and it's a very clear tactic. I'm sure it's a tactic to try and shield his eyes to not being blazed by the sun. And to quote Renier Wolfcastle, the goggles do nothing as he's being blinded. And secondly, he's serving into the Del Potro backhand, and it's a very clear tactic. It's not exactly a surprising tactic from Rafael Nadal here, which is to try and put everything humanly possible into the backhand side. The problem is, of course, that it's kind of difficult to do. When the ball is being hit at you that hard on the forehand wing, it's very difficult to maintain any sort of structure and strength in a rally. And you mentioned the slice that Nadal employs here. He's doing it out of necessity because he's being pummeled on that side.
Just bludgeoned with repeated strikes. I mean, so first set is relatively close, and I think you could argue that the players were even, but I think the second set you see Juan Martin starting to really unload on the ball now, which is an alarming sight if you think about how we were talking about what he was doing in the first set, which was, let's not undersell that he was wailing on the ball. In the second set, I feel like he upgraded his weaponry to a disturbing degree, and now you really saw him go for it.
Yeah, you did. Let's not count out, though, the fact that at the start of that second set, there are dangerous and there are nervy moments. He's down very early and he break points against him, and it looks like, okay, here we go. Rafael Nadal's just going to run away with this. But he did really well to actually stay in there, and he actually starts playing properly. Like, I don't think he played badly in the first set, but the level just goes up to a point where some of the forehands that he's hitting and some of the ways that he's directing the ball, he's making Rafael Nadal run around like a school child, like just making, in the drill where you go from side to side. That's what he's doing. He's controlling the middle of the court and just pummeling the ball.
And when you're playing someone like Nadal at a stage like this, you need your serve, and you need a massive serve like Juan Martin has. And he played with the lead for a lot of that second set, but he really did rely on his service to bail him out of some really tricky situations. But he took an early lead at 2-1, and he really did not look back from there in the second set, which is a massive confidence booster, because I think the same thing happened in the first set where he has an early lead, he has an early break, cannot consolidate. Rafael Nadal slowly comes back, slowly imposes his will, and that's that. But in the second set, no matter how hard Rafa pushed back, you saw Del Potro say, no, I'm not going away this time, and let's push it to a third set.
Yeah, the quality's really, really high in that second set. It's a really fun one to watch. The shot making on display from both of them is pretty astonishing.
It was Jarnemi Bush. I have the memory of a goldfish, and I think recency bias is a thing, but I was stunned at the variety that Del Potro showed on his backhand, and tactically how astute he was. And I know he was always a smart guy, but just watching this back, what an interesting player. What a player with so many quality attributes that did not just involve his physicality and how big he was. He was really a thinking man's giant out there.
No, he's a freak. He really is. And I mentioned that word before, and I really do think I say it in the kindest way possible, but there's not many players who have the physical stature that he does and the physical gifts that are given to him, who also possesses the brain and everything else to go with it. It's just unfortunate that his body has not held up over his career, but he has everything. He is the proverbial 5-tool player. He has literally everything you could possibly want in a tennis player.
We enter the deciding set. The shadows are finally gone. I think I was excited for the third set, Bush, but when the shadows were gone, there was a fist was pumped in the air silently.
Good Lord. It was nice to actually be able to see the tennis ball for once.
And at this point as well, you can hear the crowd really start to get into it. Now, when you're watching this back, you'll notice Rafa's Rafa, right? Like he's a boisterous guy. He's going to fist pump a lot. But I think you saw him slowly get more animated, and Juan Martin del Potro at the same time dial it back a bit in terms of how outwardly boisterous and celebratory he was after winning some big points. Whereas Rafa, we're talking about bringing celebrations to a whole new level.
Yes, there are moments in this third set which I think are a little over the top. I think
I scoffed at you. You saw me scoff at you in the notes that we have decided for this.
I mean, who knows, right? It's an Olympic semifinal. You're representing your country. The atmosphere inside of the stadium is ridiculous. Like just the quantity of noise which is being unloaded on a pair of these after they do anything inside of a point is pretty crazy. I mean, the Argentine fans are pretty nuts. They're great fans in a lot of ways. They make a lot of noise. They support their players and get behind their players. The same is true with the Spanish fans as well. I had a recipe for a really, really good and really exciting third set with a hell of a lot of noise
Argentina, of course, not too far away from Brazil, where these Olympics are held. The third set begins, and we see a lot of the same stuff, Bush, and it's Delpo going to that Nadal backhand again and again.
Yeah, he is. He's really, really going for it at this point, and it's just so fun to watch. It really is. When you see someone, you just knew it. That's the thing. When you watch it, when you're watching points and you're seeing the ball land even slightly short, it is just being punished and put away, and it's one of the most beautiful and aesthetically pleasing shots in all of tennis.
Rafa Nadal obviously has a bag load of gifts, but the touch he displayed in this match, especially at net, Bush, there are some volleys that he's stopping dead, and I don't know how that's even possible. And some angles, I mean, for me, the revelation, and it's always the revelation when you watch Juan Martin del Potro, is the angles he can find on his forehand and how he can cut an inside-out forehand so short that it's nearly unplayable and it's unhittable back. But I thought Rafa was coming up with some delirious angles of his own, and it made for a very even contest. And we get to 2-2, and I think this is where really both players put their stakes down in terms of how much they want this.
The quality of the third set is the highest, you could argue, of any set of tennis that we've seen in modern history. It really is. That's one of the most impressive hour and a halves that you'll watch of two players who are just doing everything at the top of their game. And I think we don't talk enough about the transition that Nadal makes from defense to offense sometimes. He is the greatest of all time, without any shadow of a doubt, of someone who is in a negative position in a rally to turn it into just an outright winner from absolutely nowhere. The quality of this one is ridiculous, and it starts when Nadal is down break point at 2-2, and Delpo hits just an enormous forehand. Like, just
I had to pause
absolutely.
this. I had to pause this. It was too
Enormous.
much. My laptop speakers could not handle the sound that this forehand made.
It is terrifying how hard he hits this forehand. And Nadal just stands there. He just does the thing that you're always taught to do, which is stay in position, use your opponent's power against them. And it's exactly what he does. He just takes all the power, rips it straight down the line, and it is just a beautiful shot to watch to save a break point. And he goes bananas, and the crowd goes ballistic.
Shot of the match. There's another break point after another great rally before holding there. Then you have Nadal down 3 break points at 4-all. Gets extremely lucky with a net cord at love 40. Delpo finally gets through. He's going to serve for the match at 5-4. I think he has been the better player overall in this third set. He's forcing Rafa to come up with shots that, though he can't come up with them, they are in increasingly short supply, just because I don't care how great of a player you are. When you're put in these situations repeatedly, it's hard to come up with answers. And Juan Martin del Potro has forced Rafa into that position so many times in this match that on one hand, you're marveling at how Nadal can escape. But on the other hand, you're amazed at that. This is how consistently excellent Del Potro was in this match and long before, and where he's strung together some massive victories to win huge titles.
I think from 4-all, it gets pretty nuts. If I would highlight anything for someone to go back and check out, it is from 4-all, because both players, the momentum and the swings that happen, these two should be serving out the match. Like, that's the reality of it. If you're up love 40 and you get a break, the match should be over. But the quality of points that are strung together to give breakpoint opportunities is really, really stunning. And just as you think someone's going to reach and claw over the line, oh no, it gets taken straight back. And that is what happens. It's amazing, right? Is Del Potro is on the precipice. He's looking at that final. He's looking at the opportunity to play for a gold medal. And Rafa Nadal just comes back and shuts the door immediately, absolutely immediately, gets to love 40. The crowd is going crazy. And Nadal's celebrations at this point is, there's a point when he breaks and he runs from the net all the way to the back of the court. He's sprinting and gives it a fist bump that I have never seen. And it's insane. Like it's an enormous reaction, and it's got to get into its opponent's head, I would have thought.
As I wait for the daggers from the Rafa haters to come out, I loved it. But you know why I loved it even more? It's because you knew he eventually would lose. So the exuberance and the insane celebrations would be for naught. But all jokes aside, Olympic atmosphere, Davis Cup atmosphere, an incredible match. I have no fault on Rafa for going mental after that break, because that game was hilarious. Because even though as Juan Martin stepped to the line to serve at at 0-0 in that 5-4 service game. You knew Nadal was going to come with something, but he came with it in just a hilarious amount of machinery and firepower to break back. We get to 5-5, another big hold from Nadal. Del Potro, I think at this point, it looks like Juan Martin is not feeling super comfortable with the moment. But again, I don't know if he felt all that comfortable really from an outward manner throughout the match. It didn't look like he was feeling himself that much.
Yeah, let's talk about let's just touch on it briefly here. Is that from 4-4, the 3 games that follow it all get to love 40 immediately. That's the momentum that I'm talking about. And Del Potro gets to love 40 in that service game of Rafael Nadal's, and Nadal rips off 5 straight points. It's crazy to watch. And the momentum inside of the crowd and the energy that you're getting from them is really, really cool to watch, actually. It's one of those watching back that you just kind of wish you were there, right? Sometimes you just wish you were in one of these moments.
It's love 40 at 5-5. Rafael Nadal serving. Rafa strings together 5 straight points. And I don't think we can quantify or describe how insane the crowd is at this moment. Really do recommend you go and find this clip for yourself. But this is vintage Rafa, right? Like, he is really on the ropes to a shocking degree, even though we've seen him in this situation like 7 minutes before. But to get out of that...
Yeah, it's crazy. This is like proper Tyson Fury on the mat against Deontay Wilder in the first fight, and it just somehow finds a way to get off the canvas without really looking like he deserves to be there. And somehow he digs his way out and gets up to it. And yep, we find ourselves after a very routine, for once, service game from Juan Martin del Potro. I think he holds the love actually to take us to the tiebreak, which is something that you wouldn't expect to see at this point in the match.
Get to the tiebreak. The things that have brought JMDP to this point are what gives him a lead in this tiebreak, and it's the serve and the forehand. The forehand cooking at a ridiculous level as it has for much of this match gets him a lead. I think Bush, the rally on match point that Nadal saves, the passing shot, boy, oh boy.
Yeah, it's a ridiculous rally. It really is. It's pretty absurd to watch back. Tiebreak's pretty close, actually, and I think Del Potro just does enough, right? He just edges enough in front, and he always has a little bit of a cushion. He always has that 1 point advantage, which psychologically must be so difficult to overcome, especially when the pressure is that high on you.
In the end, it is Juan Martin del Potro who defeats Rafael Nadal in that tiebreak. An absolutely phenomenal match. 7-5 was the final marker in that tiebreak. Juan Martin del Potro collapses to the ground. Disbelief, I think, is the main emotion you see expressed on his face. A big hug between him and Rafael Nadal, who are, of course, close friends. What a match. What a moment for del Potro. I don't think it can be undersold how much injuries have really deprived us and of course himself, Juan Martin del Potro, from what could have been one of the greatest careers of all time. And a lot of work went into seeing him get to this point of his career again. And in 2016, in a moment like this where he's fighting for a chance to play for a gold medal, and the fact that he did it against Djokovic at the beginning and then now Nadal, like, you got to be joking me. What a moment.
Yeah, and I think you see that in the quotes after the match, right? He's quoted pretty much after every single win that he's having, that he's living a dream, and someone who's been out of the sport for so long and had all the surgeries and the hours put into it to try and come back at this point. It must be an incredible feeling. He's quoted saying, "I'm living a dream and the crowd makes me cry after every match," which is very true. The man is a big time blubberer. He's crying like crazy after every single win. And he's also quoted afterwards saying that it didn't matter to him. He already had won a silver medal in regards to the final upcoming against Andy Murray. And maybe that played into a little bit psychologically, but you can only imagine what it must have done mentally to overcome the number one player in the world. And then Rafael Nadal in the semifinal. What a run. And really, not a lot, really, I don't think enough gets spoken of the week and a bit that he put together in Rio.
He's definitely one of our favorites, and we wanted to do an episode that highlighted him and just the type of player he is and hopefully continues to be, but it was not going to mean gold for Juan Martin del Potro in Rio. Andy Murray captured his second singles gold after beating Delpo. Can you remember, Bush, who was the fourth man in that group of 4 in Rio?
In the semifinals?
Yeah.
That was Kai Nishikori, wasn't it?
Correct.
And It's one of those ones that if you going to a trivia night at a tennis anorak sort of situation, someone asking who won the bronze medal in 2016, I'm not sure many people would have said Kai Nishikori. If you go back and watch it, it's the best match of Kai Nishikori's career to beat Rafael Nadal, and it's one that no one ever talks about or thinks about.
And don't get me wrong, it's a bronze medal match, but it's Rafa Nadal playing for a medal for his country. So don't undersell how damn well Kai Nishikori played in that third-place match, because he was fantastic. Andy Murray, though, thwarted Juan Martin del Potro and ended that dream there. And it's been up and down for Del Potro since then. I mean, he helps Argentina win the Davis Cup in 2016, which I think, as much as it hurt to lose in the gold medal match against Murray, that feeling, that moment for his country at the Davis Cup, that erased those wounds, I think, pretty handily.
I think so. And I think you see him quoted from post-Olympics times that he felt like he was getting a second chance at everything. He felt like he was playing with found money in a lot of ways. His career had been so blighted by injuries that just to be playing again and to be part of these moments, he was incredibly grateful to have and very blessed in a lot of ways to have that. So to win the Davis Cup in 2016 was an astonishing achievement for them. And he sort of gets back to the level that we expect out of him. He's a different player, I would say, than the junior version of him and the one that wins the US Open early in his career. He does get back to the US Open final and he gets to world number 3, but I'm not so sure this is quite the fully formed version that we expected of him before all the injuries.
No, I think that final against Novak at the US Open in 2018, we watched that together, Bush, in Vancouver, and it was a bit sad because I don't think this is Novak at the peak of his powers as well, so didn't really have a good feeling about Del Potro coming into this match, and you could see it. You could see it that guy that you saw in 2016 in Rio, he was not coming back, and even though it was just 2 years ago, I think you did see a bit of that foot speed lost, a bit of that endurance was not there, and Novak capitalized on that. But he did make it back farther than I think some people thought. And it remains to be seen where Del Potro goes from here. I know there's a knee issue now, and he was aiming to come back for the Australian Open in 2020, but he wasn't able to do that. This prolonged break now for everyone, I think it might be able to buy him some time and get him back whenever he can. And let's hope he does, because he's an interesting player, an interesting person, and on his day, one of the best players we've seen. And as Bush has so eloquently noted in our notes, Rafael Nadal is just fine after this. He manages to scrape himself off the mat and win a few more titles.
Yeah, everything turned out okay for him, didn't he?
I'll read off what Rafa did after this. But can you guess he won some things? Because overall, 2016 was an awful year for Rafa. And you can argue that 2015 was also bad. I mean, this is a guy whose last slam win came at the 2014 French Open. And in 2017, he goes on to make the final in Australia, win the French, win the US Open, and right the ship. But it was a weird period for Rafa. Bush, this was not good times at all.
You know, I'm a fan of using different metaphors and examples from different sports. There was a few years ago in the WWE where they were talking about John Cena having the worst year of his career, where he won I think he won 2 world championships that year. And it's like, it got spoken up by the commentators like, this is historically terrible. That's how I imagined 2015 and 2016 by Nadal. He only won 6 titles. That's too bad. Like he's finished, not good enough anymore.
By these high standards these guys are measured by, it is the knives come out for very trivial things, it seems sometimes. But I will say that 2016, just looking back, I think Monte Carlo was the only Masters Series title he won that year as well.
Oh, shocking. It's not good enough.
All right, Bush, closing thoughts, parting thoughts on Juan Martin del Potro having a time to remember in Rio.
Yeah, fun to look back at him and see him at the height of his, not quite the height of his powers, a different sort of powers, I would say. Really fun match. Really recommend everyone to go back and watch it. The crowd makes it a really cool watch and just a very exciting time to be a tennis fan. And go back and watch that third set because it's really, really special. And we wish him all the best to come back. We really need him in the sport. And I think if we can have him playing at the top of his game, he is one player who can challenge the big three to a level that we all expect and wanted to see from the rest of the tour. So if we can have him back in some sort of reasonable fitness and at a level where he's challenging players, then I'd be really excited for that.
Well said. Bush, I'm going to give you some crazy trivia as I went down the memory hole on Juan Martin del Potro. So in 2009, of course, he beats Roger Federer in that US Open final, the shocker. But he would lose in the ATP World Tour finals of that same year in the final.
Yes.
Can you remember who beat him? Because I think if I told you this name right now, it is a shocker. It is not someone you expect.
All right. As I'm rubbing my face with my hands, which I shouldn't be during the time of COVID. Just don't do this at all. It's all right. I washed my hands before this podcast.
We're not going to put this on YouTube at all now.
No, you shouldn't do that. I'm going to say, was it Dimitrov?
No, but from the same school. This guy was probably the dad of that school. It's a Russian player, was part of that Fed rat pack that doesn't get any respect these days.
Davydenko?
It was. Oh, it was. Nikolai Davydenko, 6-4, 6-3, straight sets, beats Del Potro. I'm like, what? I do not remember that at all. But shocker. Okay, Bush, well, we will continue down our path down memory lane. And what we're going to do going forward is we're going to ask open air listeners, friends of ours, to give us a match that we should cover and tell us why it means something to them. And we'll hopefully play those messages at the beginning of each episode as we lead into what we talk about. Because I think it'll be a fun way to get our listeners involved. And I think we have a pretty wide scope, Bush, but I think our focus sometimes does narrow to not our own fault. I think it's just there's a lot of stuff to cover in tennis, a lot of players, but there are obviously matches in the past and players in the past that we haven't really covered that much. So it's going to give us an opportunity to do that, and we're looking forward to it. So hit us up on Twitter at the podcast email, which is podcast@openera.ca. And let us know what you want to watch or what you want us to watch, more importantly, Bush.
Please do. More weird, the better. More Nikolai Davydenko matches you can come up with, the better. I'm totally down for it.
I was trying to watch some Pete Sampras stuff from back in the day this week, and there's a lot of bad tennis going on in the 90s. There's a lot of 3-shot rallies, which I think, I think I liked that back in the day, but very interesting.
Fun fact. Pete Sampras strung his racket at 70 pounds. If I hit a tennis ball with that racket, my entire body would break.
It's a strong man.
I would just be like a cartoon character, those situations where they just fall in half, like they just collapse instantly.
Before we go, I just want to maintain, really hope everyone remains safe during this time and puts into practice all the recommendations and tips from our local and federal officials about social distancing and making sure we use safety first when we go outside and help us all get through this pandemic. I know it's been a trying period so far, but I think we're all going to be better off when we get through this if we all work together there. So just want to reiterate that. Simon, this close off has taken me 20 minutes, but I will ask you now finally if there is anything else left to publish, left to promote.
I don't think so. I think you've touched on everything. Make sure you hit us up on all the channels that we have available to us. We do love to interact with you. Big shout out to our Discord as well. It's always fun to get in there and chat about tennis. So if you feel like you want to come and support us, throw us a few dollars on Patreon. It really does help us be part of the Discord. Chat about some tennis in the downtime and retrospective thoughts about some amazing matches throughout tennis history. It's fun to go down memory lane. And I wish you can join us for it.
Yeah, we're definitely doing a Luke match, a Luke from the Discord match first, because he is our prime man. So we're going to ask him to drum up something for week 1 when we continue this. But yeah, hit us up, stay safe, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks as always for listening to the Open Era Podcast.